My dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Gordon Glenister hosts an outstanding podcast called the Influence Global Podcast. Gordon, tell these fine folks what they're going to get when they listen.
We interview some amazing people from all around the world, whether they be influencers, content creators, brands, influencer platforms, anybody involved in the influencer industry. There's some fantastic guests that make a fine listen for you. You can find them on marketingpodcasts.net, or you can also find them on my own website, which is www.gordonglenister.com.
Or, of course, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story in business. The one that answers why somebody should buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. At WordWrite, we call it your capital S story. This is the story that defines the very character and nature of an organization. In each episode of Storylines Live, we feature great guests with fantastic insights from their personal experience on how to better help you and your organization uncover, develop, and share your capital S story. In this episode, truly personally honored to have a good friend and wise business advisor, Michael Halperin. First came to know Michael through his work as an EOS implementer. Great. We're going to talk about EOS a little bit. We're going to talk about a lot more in this episode. Michael is really an accomplished individual in many, many ways. And we'll hit as many of these things in this episode, folks, as we can. I don't know if we'll be able to hit all of them. Michael came to the EOS implementer role after a successful career in running technology operations and companies as a CEO, selling companies. He knows from personal experience the importance and the worries and the issues that CEOs need to deal with as he works with them in EOS, and also his latest venture, which we will definitely talk about, ProcessWorks. I have to say, as a musician on the side, Michael is also a very accomplished musician, and recently I had the opportunity to listen to a version of a song he had done that was really amazing with, I think it was 6-part harmony. Michael, you'll have to explain that to everybody. Michael, welcome to Storylines Live.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Anything in your background that you feel our audience should know that I missed?
No, you nailed it pretty well. I've kind of had two careers. I started out working for other companies in a lot of different roles. And at one point along the way, kind of realized I'd sort of become a lousy employee. So I became an entrepreneur. And since then, I have founded or co-founded 5 different companies. And along the way, one of those companies, that's where I implemented EOS, where I learned how to be understand the entrepreneurial operating system. And I joined the EOS worldwide community back in 2017. I was the first guy in Western Pennsylvania to do that. And since then, I've worked with over 60 companies and delivered almost 500 full-day sessions with those companies. And along the line, saw that some of the companies were struggling with part of EOS we call the process component. And that's where ProcessWorks came from.
Boy, folks, we're going to talk a lot about that, especially in the second half of this episode. I will just say, Michael, as somebody who WordWrite has been one of your clients as an implementer, and from personal experience, and Michael, please don't poke and prod me on this, but there's strategy and there's execution. And really, when we talk about ProcessWorks today, execution, that's what ProcessWorks is all about. Having a great idea of what you're going to do with your company and actually getting it done are two very different things. So very excited to dig into that with you today. Michael, we always ask our guests on Storylines Live, of the 4 questions that the capital S story, as we've defined it, answers, which is most important to you right now and where you're at? So is it encouraging people to buy from you, work for you, invest in you, partner with you, or perhaps maybe it's something else?
I would say it's probably partner with me, which kind of means for what we do, buying from me.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think where storytelling is so important is to get people to relate with both EOS and with ProcessWorks. You're really asking people to put a lot of trust in you because their business is their most precious asset. So they really have to understand, who I am and who we are and what it is that we do, and have that confidence in our ability to do that. And storytelling is a great way to get that across.
One of the things about storytelling for us, Michael, as an organization and the clients we work with is a story is not really a transactional event. It's not a one and done sort of a thing. And it strikes me that the work you do as an EOS implementer and through ProcessWorks, it's a relationship, right? You're not going to have just one meeting with a client. How long do you typically work with an organization, and what's that relationship like?
So on the EOS side, the average is about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
With sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. I've got a couple clients I've been working with for 5 years. With ProcessWorks, it's a bit shorter. Usually it starts out as an initial 2 or 3 month engagement, and they can continue on from there depending on how much help they need from us in terms of continuing to build out their processes.
That's great. That's a great background. I appreciate that. So it gives people a sense of the long-term relationship. I mean, for instance, you and I, we know each other, and our paths cross a lot, but we're not actively working with each other right now. So your story and your guidance to us is something that is long-lived, and I like to think fruitful.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Paul. Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, how does your story, that background that I shared at the very top of this episode, how does that inform what you do on a daily basis? Where does your story fit in what you're doing and working with other companies?
So, gosh, that's a deep question. I mean, at the end of the day, my story is who I am, right? Isn't that
Yeah.
true for all of us? So
Mhm.
everything that I bring, the confidence that my clients put in me, in the work that we do, it's all about that. It's all about that story. In terms of my ability to convey that story, there's certain things that I've learned along the way when I explain who I am and first introduce myself as an EOS implementer. We literally call it the story. And one of the things I do in the story is I talk about being an entrepreneur, and that, I've worked for a lot of different companies, and 5 of them I've started along the way. And I always say I've had some really great successes. I've had some really lousy setbacks. And I learned a lot more from the setbacks from the success. And I can always tell who the entrepreneur in the room is, because that's the one that kind of gets that little grin on their face and nods their head when I
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I know when we started working together, that was immediately one of the things that made a difference to me, was that you had sat in a seat like mine and you understood what it was like to, as Harry Truman's the sign on his desk, the buck stops here, right? The ultimate decision maker.
It is so important. I definitely need to, and this is a difference between who I am now and where I was early in my career. Early in my career, it was very important to me to convey how much I knew and that I know my stuff and that I can do what needs to be done. That's really secondary. The first thing that people want to know when you're working with an executive leadership team is, have you been in my shoes? And do you know what my life is like? Because they won't work with you if they don't understand that. And the best way to convey that is through the story.
Wow. Well, that leads into my next question for you. Obviously, one of the reasons we do Storylines Live is because we have a particular take that we believe is important and beneficial to the business community to share on storytelling. We always ask our guests, though, what's your take on storytelling? Before you met me, Michael, before you learned about the word right concept of the capital S story, where did storytelling fit into what you do? And even where does it fit today?
Well, I think it's even broader than that, Paul. So, like what you talk about in the book, storytelling, it's who we are. It's what we are as a species. We did not develop as a species listening to podcasts or
Well,
streaming on Netflix or even reading books. It
right.
was sitting around the campfire and passing things down, the culture, the lore. It's storytelling that does that. And to this day, even with all the technology we have around us, when we have our small children, what do? We tell them stories. It's the power of moderation, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's
Yes.
the power of hope, Cinderella, right? It's it's
Yes.
it's the power of perseverance, the little engine that could. Even the stories in the Bible. It's who we are. It's wired into us. So what I've found in my work is that when I'm trying to explain something to something that just doesn't seem to be landing, I try to find that story that I can tell, and that usually gets them over the hump.
Wow. Couldn't have said it better myself, Michael. In that campfire you were talking about, I'm sure when the first person who figured out how to start a fire on purpose wanted to teach somebody else how to do it, they told them a story. What do you think?
Absolutely, and it probably started with them bragging about how smart they were.
It probably did. Oh, humans, we're so predictable. All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break here. And when we come back, we're going to dig into Michael's work with EOS and ProcessWorks, his latest venture. And along the way, we might get a little sprinkle of some other things he's involved in as well. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Gordon Glenister hosts an outstanding podcast called the Influence Global Podcast. Gordon, tell these fine folks what they're going to get when they listen.
We interview some amazing people from all around the world, whether they be influencers, content creators, brands, influencer platforms, anybody involved in the influencer industry. There's some fantastic guests that make a fine listen for you. You can find them on marketingpodcasts.net, or you can also find them on my own website, which is www.gordonglenister.com.
Or, of course, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back, folks, to this episode of Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story in business, the one that answers why somebody should buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. This is the story that defines the very character and nature of an organization. At WordWrite, we call it your capital S story. In this episode, honored to have my good friend and wise business advisor, Michael Halperin, with us. Michael is an EOS implementer. He was the first EOS implementer in Western Pennsylvania, where our company is based, Pittsburgh. And he's got a great new venture that's related to EOS, but adds another level into a very specific area that's important to every business. It's called ProcessWorks. Michael, give the audience a sense of how you help the people and businesses you serve.
So when we talk about EOS, EOS, and for those who aren't familiar with it, is a complete system of simple tools. And the way that we describe what it does for organizations, it gives them three things that we call vision, traction, and healthy. So vision is about alignment. It's about getting the leaders of the organization on the same page with where the organization is going, how it's going to get there. Traction is about execution. It's teaching them the tools they need to execute with discipline and accountability to make that vision actually real. And healthy is about bringing them together as a functional, healthy, cohesive leadership team, because a lot of times they're not. Once we infuse vision, traction, healthy into the leadership team, we teach them how to cascade that down to the organization, ultimately getting to the point where everybody in the organization is crystal clear where the vision is, where the business is going, how it's going to get there. Everybody's executing with discipline, being held accountable. The entire organization moves forward as a healthy, functional, cohesive whole. So that's what we do. The way we do that is by helping organizations become strong in 6 key components of their business: vision, people, data, issues, process, traction. And as an EOS implementer, what I found was the one that people really struggled with was that process component. It's scary. And we work primarily with small businesses, organizations with somewhere between usually 20 and 250 employees. They don't have the expertise, they don't have the time, but they intuitively understand, my goodness, if we could make our processes work better, would be much more consistent, more predictable. Our customers would be happier, our employers would be happier, would be more scalable, more manageable, more productive, more profitable. So I happen to have a 7-year background in business process management, previous life. So I took that expertise, which was primarily working with bigger companies, and figured out a way to build a methodology that really worked for small, medium businesses. So we're focused on companies in that 20 to 250 employee range that want to get their processes under control and get those benefits of having processes that work much, much better. So that's kind of what we do and how we help organizations.
That is phenomenal. And for the audience, I'm sure there are many folks in the audience who've heard of EOS, but I will just say, as the leader of an organization that has implemented EOS, in the analogy I often draw, Michael, is, if I wanted to build my own house, I could probably do that. It would take me maybe 40 years because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And I feel that way about EOS in the sense that somebody has already figured out through the entrepreneurial operating system how to create the systems and the routines to help a company grow, to create an internal management system that you don't have to spend time doing it yourself, right? It's an amazing thing. Michael, I'll tell you, today, when we work with clients frequently, one of the questions they'll ask us is, are we an EOS company? And that's because there's an understood common language, right? It's a great thing. It really is. As you pointed out, though, the most difficult piece of those 6 critical areas is really the process. Tell the audience a little bit about how you got the idea for ProcessWorks and what you folks do through ProcessWorks.
So it literally started with one of my clients saying, we're really struggling this. Can you help us out? So I went out and I spent about a half a day with them and just threw a flip chart up on the wall, and we just started working through some stuff and came up with some stuff. I'm like, that was pretty cool. So another company came along and asked the same question. So I went back and I leveraged some of the same things. And this happened 3 or 4 times. And by the time I was done, I'd turned it into this methodology that I had documented and started rolling it out to some of my other EOS clients. So fast forward to today, we've done this with about 20 organizations, and it's really accelerated. It so simplifies it. To put it in perspective, one of my clients said they spent 6 months trying to document their sales process. And we sat down with them, took them through the workshop, taught them the methodology, and it took us a little less than an hour to document their entire sales core process, identifying the gaps and the things they needed to develop. So there's just this tendency, because it's so big and so scary, that they just don't want to tackle it. And that's the biggest barrier. So we've just really simplified it.
So let me wrap my head around this. This client of yours was struggling for 6 months to document the sales process, and using ProcessWorks tools in about an hour, you were able to get things organized.
Yeah, the longest it's ever taken us to document a core process is 3 hours. And that was the litigation process for a law firm that was doing business in multiple states. So they literally were forced by the states to do things differently in each state. And we were still able to get through that in 3 hours. Usually it's between 1 and 2 hours. And people are amazed how much they get done and how quickly it works. And the idea is we just simplify it and focus on the critical few.
Wow, that is just amazing, Michael. Folks, got to check this out. We will share at the end of the episode how to learn more about ProcessWorks. But that's the sort of time saving that in this 21st century, as everything moves at such a faster pace, why wouldn't somebody explore an opportunity to move things much more quickly and effectively, right? That's just amazing. So one of the things we always ask our guests, Michael, is what makes you different from the competition? Certainly, having ProcessWorks is a huge differentiator. But when you think about this question, what comes to mind?
So it's the simplicity. There's a lot of process methodologies out there. There's Lean, there's Six Sigma, and they're all really, really good. But this is about small, medium businesses. These are these companies, they don't have the time. You can't lock your people in a room for 2 weeks to go build out a process.
Right.
So what we've done is we've come up with this very simple, and oh, by the way, when you do lock yourself in the room for 2 weeks, what are you going to come out with? A 70-page operating manual that nobody wants to read. So then it becomes what we refer to as shelfware, that thing that sits on the shelf and nobody follows it. Because documenting the process is half the battle. You got to implement it too.
Yeah.
So what makes ProcessWorks different is, number one, it is a very simple, light touch, tops down methodology that focuses on the critical few. So what you end up with is not a 70-page operating manual, but it's usually somewhere between 4 and 6 pages that outlines the flow. It goes deep only where it needs to go deep. That's one of the places people get stuck, is they think they have to go to this tremendous level of detail. And there are some places where you need to, but in a core process, there may be only 3 or 4 places where you need to do that. So we're able to identify what those are and then develop that. And then the other piece about it, of ProcessWorks that makes it unique, is we do work with those organizations to actually implement the process, because we know that documenting your process is great, but it's half the battle. If people don't follow the process, then we're not adding the value that we need to add, and we're not going to let that happen.
Wow, that is critical. So as you said earlier in the episode, Michael, you'll typically work with an organization through the ProcessWorks engagement for 2 or 3 months and maybe longer, right?
Yeah, and it's usually over those 2 or 3 months, it's only a few days together. It's
Right.
one full day workshop and then 2 half-day workshops. We usually spread those out. And then at the end of that, some organizations are like, yep, we got it from here, and you've taught us what we need, and we can do it. Or others say, you know what, we want you to keep coming in for these half-day workshops, and we'll just bang out a process each time we get together.
But it's like so many other things in life, is what I'm getting from you, is you need the guidance and the accountability from the ProcessWorks team along the way to make sure that the execution is really happening, right? And that you're just not, I mean, every organization, and I love our company, but certainly our company too. And, uh, if we don't have the outside expertise when we're tackling really big issues, it just doesn't go as well. I mean, you sometimes can't see the forest for your own staring at the trees, right? You need that outside perspective.
Yeah, and it's also a question of expertise. You're a manufacturing company, or a marketing company, or a
Right.
law firm, or a IT services company. That's what you know. You don't know business process. You
Yes.
don't know change management. And the implementation of the process is all about change management. So it's helping people think through, how am I going to convey this? How am I going to hold people accountable? Where ProcessWorks dovetails so well with EOS is that companies that are running EOS, and Paul, you know this because you're an EOS company, the
Mhm.
discipline and the accountability and the ability to manage people, set expectations, and hold them to expectations with EOS is just light years beyond most organizations. But we've done this also with companies that aren't running on EOS, and we can still help them figure out. In fact, sometimes it's even more important with them to
Yeah.
help them understand, how do you set the expectations? How do you measure? How do you provide feedback and make sure that people actually, the word I use is normalize that process? That's no longer the new process. It's just the way we do things.
Right. Right. It's just like breathing. It's something you do without having to put a lot of extra thought into it, right? Yeah. Michael, what brings you the most satisfaction in the work you do? Kind of like, why do you do what you do rather than a million other things you could be doing?
Well, it's a little bit different for the two sides of the business. With the EOS business, it's really seeing that company just take off. And I've got a company I started working with. There was dysfunction on the leadership team. The company was stuck. There was a lot of infighting, a lot of politics, and the company just wasn't moving forward. Since they started implementing EOS, they've grown by 40%. The leadership team has come together and is working much, much better. Everything has smoothed out. They've also implemented ProcessWorks. So those are the kinds of things I see. On the EOS side, there's companies that have told me flat out, a couple of them through COVID and another through just some industry turmoil they had to go through. They said, Michael, our business wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for EOS. So those are the kinds of things that I look to and like, this is why I love doing what I do on that side. And then the other side is when I hear the comments from companies about how well they're working. And the company, we're about to publish a case study on our ProcessWorks website, on a company called Consensus, an IT services company, and they talk about how their customers never had any idea how hard they were running behind the curtain,
Mhm.
scrambling around to getting things done. And they've documented all of their processes using ProcessWorks, and now the people hold each other accountable. That if they see somebody do something and it's not following the process, they go, dude, you didn't do this the right way. This has to be done like this. And that's how you roll out those processes, and that's where the impact really comes from. So when I see those kinds of things happening, that gives me a lot of satisfaction.
Well, that's great. I was going to ask you about a client success story or a case study, and I guess Consensus fits the bill, right?
Yeah, great company in Pittsburgh. Security services company does great work, very high customer satisfaction, and doing some pretty leading edge stuff too.
That's wonderful. Michael, is there anything that you wished we'd talked about in the episode that we haven't so far?
Well, I guess there's two. First, on the business side,
Yeah.
the story of how I found the consultant that I'm working with in uh, ProcessWorks is an interesting story
Oh,
because I have
yeah.
a
I was
full-time
wondering if you
job.
were going to get to that.
Yeah,
Go ahead, man.
I got a full-time job as an EOS implementer, and I saw the value that ProcessWorks could provide to organizations, and I knew I needed to find somebody else to do it. So I went out and I talked to a number of different people, both in Pittsburgh, outside of Pittsburgh, that I thought might have the chops to do that. And I found somebody who was a natural public speaker and trainer and facilitator. She started doing public speaking in high school when she was 16 years old. She taught public speaking at the University of Kansas when she was 22. Decided academia wasn't for her, went to work in transportation, logistics, and the steel industry. Every place she's been, she's ended up designing processes, building processes, and training people on process. So she was just the absolute natural, perfect fit for what we're looking for. And what's really cool about it is it happens to be my daughter, Sarah.
There you
So
go. Love
I get to
it.
work with
Plot twist.
my kid in the business every day. So that's a lot of fun. And then the other thing you didn't ask about is how I got to do a six-part harmony.
Yeah, please. Let's talk about that.
So the song is called Seven Bridges Road.
That's
It's
great.
originally done by the Eagles, and the reality I have a music studio in my upstairs bedroom, and the reality is I'm not a very good singer, but through the wonders of technology, I can make myself sound like a good singer. But the one thing I do have is a tremendous range. So there's a 3.5 octave range in my voice from very, very low, and I think I shared with you a song I
You
sing, which
did. Yes.
bass, but I can also get up into the falsetto. And none of those parts necessarily sound great as solos, but when you blend them together, and I've just always had a love for harmony. The Eagles, the Beach Boys, the Beatles, those groups that do really
Mm,
creative harmony
yes.
kinds of things, Zach Brown Band. And so I heard this song. It's a 4-part harmony originally. I thought, I think I can add a little bit to it. So that's how I made a 6-part harmony. And all 6 parts are me, the wonders of technology.
If you put that on the internet, we'll link to it. I'm not going to compel you to do that, but folks, I did listen to it and it is amazing. Seven Bridges Road is pretty cool. And Michael, I think that brings up something very important. Lately, I've been on this kick. I believe every human being is a creative individual, and certainly, I think along the way, most of us on our way to adulthood, somebody tells us that we're not creative or we're not good or whatever. But you and I are both musicians. I get a lot out of that I bring to my business practice, and I'm sure you do as well. Well, what are your thoughts on creativity and how that fits into a business leader's story?
Um, Gosh, that's a great question. I think creativity is really, really important. You've got to come up with ideas. The people that we really focus on in the EOS side of the business, we call visionaries.
Yes,
And you're a visionary, Paul. And visionaries, that is their job, is just to think up cool stuff
right.
and figure out ways to make things better, and just constantly thinking about things and thinking out of the box, and that's what great visionaries do. And the visionary isn't necessarily the best person to always implement their
Yeah,
idea. That's where they need what in EOS we refer to as the integrator. But it's the visionaries that really drive everything forward. And if you think about all of the great businesses and the great innovations that have happened, there's usually a visionary that's behind that. And that's what moves business forward. If you look at it in detail, it fits and starts with all these different companies and competitors. But if you take a big, big, big step back and look at the history of how things have happened and all the innovation, it's the creativity and coming up with, that looks like a problem. I wonder if we could come up with a different way to solve that. And that's where the creativity comes into play.
that is just an awesome description. Thank you for sharing that, Michael. Before I let you go, how can people find you? Or if our audience is interested in connecting with you, what's the best way to do that?
So the two best ways to do that are through the ProcessWorks website or just shoot me an email. So my email address is michael.halperin, Halp as in Paul, ERIN, at eosworldwide.com. And our website is process-works.com. So if you go to the website, you can learn more about that as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michael. It's
All
been
right, Paul.
great, my friend, to have you in this episode. Really appreciate it. And we'll have to have you back sometime later because, one thing we didn't talk about today is your space company and some other interesting things you're doing. And I think our audience would really enjoy learning about those as well. Speaking of which, I want to say thank you to all of you who've been with us for this episode today. Really appreciate our audience. And we look forward to being with you on the next episode of Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story in business, the one that answers why somebody would buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. This is the story we call your capital S story. See you next time on the next episode of Storylines Live.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Gordon Glenister hosts an outstanding podcast called the Influence Global Podcast. Gordon, tell these fine folks what they're going to get when they listen.
We interview some amazing people from all around the world, whether they be influencers, content creators, brands, influencer platforms, anybody involved in the influencer industry. There's some fantastic guests that make a fine listen for you. You can find them on marketingpodcasts.net, or you can also find them on my own website, which is www.gordonglenister.com.
Or, of course, wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.